Hey, this is Darren from Property Prosperity. Just a bit of a warning before we start tonight. If you are a valuer, then maybe you shouldn't watch this episode because you'll probably end up a little bit depressed. But basically what I want to have a chat to you tonight about is valuations and, do they serve, are they valuable at all? And is it really worth the effort of getting a valuation done? So probably the thing to think about is who valuations are prepared for. Basically, valuations are prepared for banks generally, and they do serve a purpose for banks. Their job is to try and be as conservative as possible and to not take risks at the end of the day. What they're doing is they're lending you money, and they want to make sure that if things go wrong and you stop paying your interest, that they can sell their property and get their money back. And remember, when banks lend you money, they generally, the maximum they want to lend you about 80% of the value of the property. So they want to make sure, worst case scenario, if you stop paying your interest, they can sell it off for 80% of the value, which essentially is, in theory, should sell off quite quickly. And then they get their money back, they've paid their bills. You still owe the bank the full amount that you owe them. Hey Dave, thanks for joining. But essentially the banks have covered their bills, and then they can just hassle you for the rest of the money then. So that's what banks are focused on. They're focused on minimizing their risk, and they're obviously quite conservative because they don't, the riskier it is, the more it's going to cost them down the track if things go wrong. So that's what valuations are designed for too. They're designed for the intention of how do we conservatively value a property, and how do we make sure we're not going to lose money down the track if we're a bank that we're lending money to someone that we're not 100% sure of their situation. So why that is not particularly useful for you, if you're trying to get a bit of a guide of what your house may be worth. The reason it sparked my decision to talk about this tonight is because I was having a chat to somebody, and I was, they were thinking about getting me to come and sell their house. And I said, hey, well, no problems. What I can come down is give you an appraisal on what your house is worth. And they said to me, oh, actually, my wife, she works for a valuation company, so we've already had a valuation done on the property. And so what I said to them is, a valuation and an appraisal is not necessarily the same thing. And I know the danger, and for good and bad reasons, really. Valuations in theory have been designed to be conservative with the bank's interest in mind, to try and be as conservative as possible. But then likewise, the people's concerned about appraisals, generally they're done by real estate agents that rock up, and they have their own self-interest. Obviously, they understand that you might want to choose the agent that is going to sell it for the highest price and may charge you the lowest fees. And so what they're inclined to do is then say, oh, well, you're actually, your house is worth $1 million when it's only worth, 700,000. And so some people believe that, and they believe that, I'm going to go with the agent that says they're going to get me the highest price because obviously, they're the best agent. Where in reality, it's best for an agent to actually tell you the truth of what your house is actually worth, because there's nothing worse than putting your house on the market at $1 million and then sits on the market for a year and a half. You end up getting, $550, because it's been on the market for a year and a half, and everyone's, you've lost all that chance of trying to sell it when it initially was on the market. Whereas you could have put it on the market at the true value, 700,000, got a whole pile of people in there and they competed against it, and you might have got 770. You got an extra $70,000 than you otherwise would. Whereas when you leave it on the market, then, to be honest, it goes a bit stale, and there's a high chance you're going to get a lot less than if you otherwise had put on at a fair price. So that's the first thing, to understand that everyone has their own agenda. So valuer's agenda is to look after the banks and to make sure they're quoting conservative prices for your property. And likewise, quite often, a real estate agent's agenda is to try and get the listing. That's what they call it, getting a listing, which is trying to sell your house. And they understand that you want the highest price for your house, and so they're inclined to want to overquote you what the house is worth. So what do we do then if we've got this situation where we're worried about valuers, because they're obviously generally geared towards the banks, and they quite often undervalue a property. And likewise with an appraiser from a real estate agent, they're quite often focused on overquoting the value of the property. So really what you need to do is get someone with an independent viewpoint. See, what I do is I go and I do what's called a property assessment. And I know it just sounds like a different word, but essentially what I do is I come in and I back it up with data. And I also not only try and find comparable sales in the property, but also look at ways of actually trying to, firstly, marketing the property, which is obviously the way you market a property is going to increase the value of the property. And so this is something that's not taken into account when you're talking to a valuer. A valuer will go and look at your house and look at the house down the road and say, hey, the house down the road sold for $450. Your house is about the same as the house down the road, so yours should sell for $452. So they value yours at $450 essentially. And so the issue with that is, how do we know how that house down the road was marketed. Did they have nice photos? Did they have a video? How was it presented on the internet? Did they have a good story? What did the agent do when they were marketing it? Did they have lots of opens? Did they present the house really well? Did they communicate it really well? Did they follow up? And the reason that matters is because the harder the agent tries and the better they present the house, the more likely you're going to get a lot more people there. And the more likely are you going to get people, the more people you get to look at the house, the more people are going to put in offers. And the more people that put in offers, the more chance you get of, the situation people are competing against each other. So, and obviously when people start competing against each other and they really want it, they're going to pay the maximum they're willing to pay. Because the crazy thing is, it's not about what the house down the road sold for. It's what someone is willing to pay on that particular day. So the value of the property is what someone's willing to pay for it. I've got so many examples of where I've sold a house so much more than where other houses have sold for. Like example, I sold a house in Aldinga Beach, not long ago. The identical house next door sold for $252,000. I sold my house for $330,000. It was identical. What the difference between me and the agent next door is I just presented my house really well. I marketed my house really well. I got heaps of people there. I sold my house within a week, $78,000 more than the house next door took 3 months to be able to sell for. So likewise, so you're comparing that. If you look at the difference between agents, that's going to make a massive difference. I just sold a commercial property recently. I sold it in excess of $1.3 million. A valuer had recently come out and valued the property at $900,000. So you can see the difference between, that's $400,000 difference. So what is that? I don't even know how much that is. That's a lot of money. That's like 40% more purely by marketing this property really well, getting a lot of people in there and trying to present it in a way that people could see the value in the property. With that other, just the residential property I talked about, I sold that for $70,000 more. It's only a $300,000 property. So that's more than 20% more than the house next door sold for. So you can see why the situation for a valuer is so flawed. Is because they're trying to say this is what the house is worth, but in reality, what the house is worth is what someone's willing to pay for it. So you can never really say what it's worth until someone actually comes and buys it. I think to understand, when an agent comes and appraises your property, the agent's not buying your house. When you look at your property and say, hey, this is what I think my house is worth, you're not buying your house either. When a valuer comes out to value your property, they're not buying your house. At the end of the day, if the valuer is willing to put their money on the line and buy it, then that's what it's worth. But in reality, that's only one person. You're not really going to know what your house is worth until you present it in the best possible way. You get as many people there as you possibly can, which is essentially the market. You need to get the market there, and you need to find that one person that's willing to pay more than everybody else. Because the crazy thing is, even though the valuer may have valued the property at $900,000 and I sold it for in excess of $1.3 million, once the property settles, that's what it's worth. And if you went back to that same value and got them to come and value the property, guess what price they'd value it for? In excess of $1.3 million, because that's what it sold for. Likewise with that property I sold, for $330,000 when the house next door for $252,000. If I'd have got my appraisal done, the week before I sold it, they would have valued my property at $252,000, because essentially that's what the property next door sold for. The next week after that, when I sold my property at $330,000, get a valuer come in and value it, they'll value it at $330,000, because essentially that's what people paid for it. So, when I'm selling properties, I'm constantly getting agents calling me up all the time, just saying, hey, did you really sell that property at that price? Because, how is that possible? Because, the house next door sold for $80,000 less, or $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever it happens to be. They're coming to me saying, is that a fair price? Did you get lots of people come and have a look at it? They're trying to understand why the price sold at that price. And the thing is about, them trying to understand is they don't understand the difference between agents, or the difference between, presenting the property really well or communicating really well, all that sort of stuff, which seems intangible as far as they're concerned, because all they can really do is look at comparable houses next door. The thing is, they don't understand, they haven't actually had the experience to understand there is differences between the way properties are presented and the marketed as well. So you can sort of see, valuations are really good if you're a bank and you want to be quite conservative. And, appraisals are good from real estate agents if you want, just to try and find out what best case scenario might be. But what you need is that in between. You need some sort of independent advice to say, hey, what is the real value of my house? What is someone without an agenda, what's it actually really going to be worth? And I suppose that's what I do for my clients. I go out and do this property assessment. To be honest, it takes quite a bit of work. I spend quite a bit of time with the clients and go out and look at the property. I go away and prepare a report, which is a couple of hundred pages, or over 100 pages of information, where I go through everything I possibly can. And I sit down with the client for a couple of hours after that, just going through everything we need to think about, just to make sure the client believes. At the end of the day, it's about just everybody understanding that we're on the same page. We've got all the information we possibly can. But in reality, the important thing to understand is, until you put it on the market, until you get the market there, and until you get that one person that's willing to pay more than everybody else, no one really knows what the property's worth. So all we can do is the best we possibly can as a real estate agent is get lots of people there, make them fight for it, and then that's it. At the end of the day, whether if you put it on the market and at 450 and you get 100 people there on your first open and everyone's fighting for it, and then the highest price you can get is 410, then it's worth 410. If you put it on the market at 450 and you get 100 people there and they're all fighting and you get 480, it's worth 480. So all you can do is present the house in the best possible light, and whatever people pay for the property is what it's worth, essentially. So hopefully I haven't offended any valuers. Hopefully, and they understand the flaw in their process. Essentially, all they can do is look at historical value. I've got so many examples in the past where I had a property once where I bought the property at 250. I got my tradies in there like the next day. We worked day and night for like a month. It was like one of those renovation rescue things. We got in there and we transformed the property. It was a totally different property. And then I sold it, I sold at auction, which is unusual for me because I don't normally sell at auctions. But I knew this was going to be a problem because it had gone up from 250. When I sold at auction, it sold at 350. So essentially, within the space of a month, it'd gone from 250 up to 350. So I'd gained $100,000 worth of value. So the thing for valuers, and I knew this was going to be a problem. That's one of the reasons why I went to auction, because the property was actually my own and I was actually selling it myself, and I thought maybe they might think I was misleading them in some way. So by going to auction, it made me detached from the process. Essentially, I hired an auctioneer to come in and do the process. Heaps of people turned up, they all bid for it, and I ended up getting, I think it was more than 350. Valuers actually rang me up after that, and they said, "Hey, well, it can't be worth 350. You only bought it like a month ago for 250. How can it possibly be worth 350 now?" The thing they forgot to, or they chose to ignore, is the fact that every other house in that street had sold for more than 350. And so all their comparable sales they used to compare my house against were more than 350. There wasn't a single house that had sold less than 350. So I sold my house for more than 350. Every other house in the street that sold for more than 350. It just happened that the property I bought, obviously I got it at a fairly good price, but also the amount of effort and the amount of money and the amount of time and to get to that point where I could make it worth $100,000 more than it was a month ago, they didn't see any of that. So all they do is look at the price at 250, look at the price at 350, saying it's just not possible, it's only worth. And the problem that created for me was the purchaser really struggled to get their finance. The bank came in saying, "Hey, it can't be worth $100,000 more than what the guy paid for it only a month ago." So it took me a lot of communication backwards and forwards, and it was hard for them to argue the case because every other house had sold for more than 350 in the street. So, they at some point in time they just had to accept it at the end of the day because it had gone to auction. It was a fair and open process. There wasn't any misleading situation there, and likewise, the person that bought it saw the value in it. It was worth the price they paid for it. They didn't overpay for it. So hopefully you can understand that, and apologies to any valuers out there, but they do serve a purpose. Obviously, their purpose out there is to act conservatively and make sure the banks aren't going to lose any money. But if you're trying to work out what your house is worth, maybe a valuation might not be the best way for you to be able to do that. Particularly if you're a property developer, it's you're buying a property with the intention of creating value. A valuer can't take into account any potential value you may create in the property. All they can do is look at what it's worth right now and compare it to comparable houses in the area. So as a property developer, valuations are almost pointless. As a person that's going to renovate properties and to sell, they're almost pointless as well. As a person that might buy and hold, you may consider it to some degree, but remember, if you're actually going to sell your property, you need to take into account how we're going to present the property and what the actual person's going to pay when they actually buy the property. So in that case, if you're looking at selling your property, it's not particularly useful as well. So I suppose hopefully you understand now. I'm not anti-valuations. You just got to understand they're there for a particular purpose, and that purpose may not necessarily suit what you're trying to use them for. So hopefully you liked what I had to say. If you're a value, you probably don't, but anyway, still click on the like button because hopefully you found it interesting anyway. And if you know someone that's out there that's trying to work out what their property's worth, and maybe they have used a valuation to try and work out what their property's worth, and maybe click on the share button, because hopefully it'll open their eyes to a few things. And yeah, if you've got something you'd like me to talk about in a future episode, then click on the comment button. I'd love to have a chat about anything you'd like to have a chat about, or if you've had a situation where you had your property valued at way less than it's actually sold for, I'd love to hear about and see your experience. So thanks, guys, and I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye.